The fluorescent lights of the Sterling Meadows Community Clubhouse hummed with a monotonous, oppressive buzz, a sound that seemed to leach the color from the beige room. David Jensen sat straight-backed in a flimsy folding chair, his gaze fixed on the woman at the head of the long table. Carol Peterson, president of the Homeowners Association Board of Directors, radiated a polished, imperturbable authority. Her blonde hair was a lacquered helmet, her smile a bright, fixed line that never quite reached her eyes. This was the monthly meeting of the Architectural Control Committee, a subcommittee of the board, and, usually, a tedious affair David attended out of a sense of civic duty. Tonight, however, felt different. Carol was pushing through a new rule and amendment to the community's aesthetic guidelines regarding unscreened ancillary structures. "The proposal," Carol announced, her voice crisp and amplified by a small microphone, "is simply a clarification to ensure a uniform and harmonious visual landscape for all residents. It gives the ACC clear authority to review any structure not attached to the primary residence, such as sheds, playhouses, or storage racks." A polite murmur rippled through the dozen or so homeowners present. David raised a hand. Carol's eyes flicked to him, and her smile tightened by a barely perceptible millimeter. "Yes, Mr. Jensen, you have a question." It was not a question. It was a weary acknowledgement of an inevitable delay. "Thank you, Madam President," David began, his voice calm and even. He was an architect, a man who believed in the integrity of structure and the logic of rules. "I was just looking at the proposed language. It seems rather broad. Could you clarify what constitutes adequate screening? And will the board be publishing a list of pre-approved screening materials to avoid subjective enforcement?" He had made his point politely, logically. It was a reasonable query about a vaguely worded rule. But in the silent space that followed, he felt a distinct chill. Carol's gaze was no longer just dismissive. It was cold, analytical, as if she were measuring him for a space he didn't know he was meant to fill. "The board," she said slowly, each word a carefully placed stone, "will interpret adequate on a case-by-case basis to maintain flexibility. We trust our residents to understand the spirit of the rule." She offered another of her brilliant, empty smiles. "Thank you for your input, Mr. Jensen. Now, if there are no substantive questions, I'll call for a vote." The message was clear. His question was not substantive. He was an obstruction. The motion passed with a mumble of ayes. As the meeting adjourned, David felt a prickle of unease. He had not opposed the rule, merely questioned its ambiguity. But Carol Peterson had looked at him as if he had declared war. The cabin stood nestled in a grove of ponderosa pines at the far edge of the Sterling Meadows development, a pocket of rustic authenticity in a sea of beige stucco and perfectly manicured lawns. It was the last lot before the development gave way to county land and the dense forest beyond. His father, a surveyor by trade, had built it with his own hands decades before the HOA existed, on a parcel his family had owned for generations. When the developer bought the surrounding land, his father had reluctantly agreed to be annexed into the association, a decision David was now beginning to regret. For David, the cabin wasn't just a house. It was a repository of memory, a testament to a life built on precision and tangible things. The scent of pine and wood smoke was the smell of his childhood. The neatly stacked cords of firewood against the east wall of the cabin were not just fuel. They were a rhythm of the seasons, a satisfying monument to preparedness that his father had taught him to build every autumn. He was sipping his morning coffee on the porch, watching a Steller's jay scold a squirrel, when he saw his neighbor, George Miller, making his way up the gravel path. George, a retired attorney with a wry smile and eyes that had seen every trick in the legal playbook. Was David's closest confidant in the neighborhood. "Morning, David," George said, accepting the offered mug of coffee. "Saw you at the meeting last night. Poked the bear. Did you?" David managed a small smile. "I just asked for clarification. Is that a crime now?" George took a slow sip, his gaze drifting toward the distant, larger homes on the other side of the community, where Carol Peterson lived. "With Carol? It might be. Just be careful. That woman files grudges like legal briefs. Everything is documented, cross-referenced, and weaponized at a later date." He gestured with his mug toward the neat stacks of firewood. "Your father taught you well. That's a work of art." He always said a proper woodpile is a sign of a well-ordered mind. David replied, a wave of affection for his late father washing over him. "Well," George said, his voice turning serious, "let's hope the HOA's collective mind is half as well-ordered. My advice: read your governing documents again. Not the welcome packet, the actual CC&Rs, the bylaws, the whole tedious mess. Everything comes down to what's written in those files, and, more importantly, what's recorded on the original plat map filed with the county. The sales brochures are fantasy. The map is law." The conversation lingered in David's mind, long after George had left. The unease from the meeting hadn't faded. It was a low hum of anxiety, a sense of being watched. A week later, the hum became a clear, sharp tone. Tucked into the handle of his front door was a crisp, cream-colored notice, weighted down by a small, smooth stone. It wasn't an envelope, just a folded sheet. The politeness of it was almost menacing. "Sterling Meadows, Homeowners Association, courtesy notice. Date October 12th, 2023, to David Jensen, 1420, Forest Ridge Lane, from Architectural Control Committee. Dear resident, this is a courtesy reminder regarding the maintenance of your property. During a recent community review, it was observed that a large woodpile is located on the east side of your residence. Please be advised that this may be in violation of the association's governing documents. Specifically, please refer to CC&R 408.4.2 View Corridor Easements, which prohibits the placement of structures or stored materials that impede designated scenic views within the community. We appreciate your cooperation in helping us maintain the aesthetic harmony of Sterling Meadows. Please remedy this issue within 14 days. David read it 3 times. A view corridor easement. He had never heard of such a thing on his property. His lot was at the very edge of the development. The only thing his woodpile blocked the view of was more trees. It felt absurd. A bureaucratic overreach so minor it was almost laughable. Almost. He remembered Carol's cold stare. George's warning. This was not a mistake. That evening, he pulled out the thick binder of documents he'd received when he inherited the cabin. He found the covenants, conditions, and restrictions and flipped to the designated section. There it was, in dense legalese, paragraph 8.4.2, view corridor easements. No structure, fence, landscaping, or stored material exceeding 4 feet in height shall be placed within the boundaries of any view corridor easement, as designated on the official plat map of the Sterling Meadows community, recorded with the county of. He grabbed a yellow highlighter and ran it over the text, a knot forming in his stomach. He didn't recall any such easement from his father's papers. The rule seemed clear, but its application felt deeply wrong. It felt targeted. He stared at the highlighted passage, the words glowing with a sudden, ominous weight. This seemingly minor notice was not a reminder. It was the opening move in a game he didn't yet understand. The certified mail notice felt different. It arrived not as a polite suggestion tucked into his door, but as an official demand that required his signature. The green slip from the postal carrier was a flag of escalation, a signal that courtesy had been withdrawn. Inside the stiff manila envelope, the letter from Pinnacle Management, the firm that ran the HOA's day-to-day operations, was printed on heavy, authoritative letterhead. Sterling Meadows, Homeowners Association Formal Notice of Violation. Date October 26, 2023. Sent via certified mail. Return receipt requested. To David Jensen, 1420 Forest Ridge Lane, Parcel ID 77 2B G4V5. RE Violation of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC&Rs, CC&R, Paragraph 8.4.2. Dear Mr. Jensen, this letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the Sterling Meadows CC&Rs. As detailed in our courtesy notice dated October 12, 2023, the stacked firewood on the east side of your property, the lot, remains in place. This constitutes a violation of CC&R, Paragraph 8.4.2, View Corridor Easements, per the authority granted to the Board of Directors in the Association's bylaws. Failure to cure this violation within 10 days of the date of this notice will result in the imposition of a fine of $50 per day until the violation is resolved. We have included a photograph of the violation, dated October 25, 2023 for your records. Sincerely, Pinnacle Management, on behalf of the Sterling Meadows HOA Board. Clipped to the letter was a glossy 4x6 photograph. It showed his woodpile, neatly stacked and solid, shot from an angle down the hill. Someone had stood at the edge of his property line and taken this picture. The clinical nature of it, the date stamp in the corner, the clear, dispassionate focus made his skin crawl. This wasn't a neighborly dispute anymore. This was a file being built against him. The anxiety that had been a low hum now sharpened into a cold, clear anger. The threat of daily fines, the certified mail, the photograph. It was a deliberate, procedural assault. Carol Peterson wasn't just holding a grudge. She was using the full, impersonal weight of the association's machinery to crush a perceived slight. David looked from the letter to the photo, and then out his window toward the woodpile his father had taught him to build. He wasn't just defending a stack of logs. He was defending his home, his history, and the quiet, principled life he had built there. He realized with absolute certainty that this was not a misunderstanding. It was an attack. The community clubhouse, which by day hosted yoga classes and children's birthday parties, was transformed for board meetings into a sterile, makeshift courtroom. The board of directors sat at a long folding table at the front, facing the assembled homeowners like a panel of judges. Carol Peterson was at the center, flanked by the treasurer, the secretary, and 2 members at large. A representative from Pinnacle Management sat at the end of the table, his laptop open, his expression one of professional boredom. David had signed up for a slot during the homeowner forum, the 15-minute period at the start of each meeting dedicated to public comment. When Carol called his name, her voice was perfectly neutral, betraying none of the history between them. Mr. Jensen, you have 3 minutes. David walked to the lectern, his violation notice and a copy of the CC&Rs in hand. He kept his voice steady, channeling the calm precision of an architect presenting a blueprint. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, he began. I'm here to discuss a violation notice I received regarding my firewood, citing CC&R Section 8.4.2, the View Corridor Easement Rule. He paused, letting the members of the small audience turn to look at him. My property is the last lot on the edge of the development. It borders undeveloped county land. I'm having trouble understanding what scenic view my woodpile is impeding. Or, for whom. I would like to formally request that the board clarify the exact boundaries of this alleged easement as it pertains to my specific parcel. Carol listened with a faint, patient smile. When David finished, she didn't address him directly. Instead, she turned to the Pinnacle Management representative, Mr. Davis. Do we have a record of the view corridor easements? Mr. Davis typed a few keystrokes. Yes. Madam President, the easements are as designated on the official plat map referenced in the CC&Rs. Thank you, Carol said, turning her gaze back to David. It was a performance of due diligence, and he was merely a bit player. Mr. Jensen, the rule is quite clear, as is its basis in the governing documents. The board's position is that the violation stands. With all due respect, David pressed. The rule states the easement must be designated on the plat map. I've reviewed my closing documents, and I see no such designation on my property survey. Could the board provide the specific document where this easement is defined for my lot? This was the heart of the matter. The rule was only enforceable if the easement actually existed on his land. Carol's smile did not waver, but a flinty hardness entered her eyes. The board's decision-making process and the documents reviewed are part of the association's official records. You are welcome to submit a formal document request to Pinnacle Management. As outlined in our policies, there may be associated copying and administrative fees. It was a perfect bureaucratic parry. She was shutting him down, burying his legitimate question under a mountain of procedure and fees. He was being told to pay for the evidence being used against him. So the board will not simply show me the map now, David asked, a note of disbelief creeping into his voice. This is not the appropriate venue for a detailed records review, Carol said dismissively. Your 3 minutes are up. Thank you for your comments. Before David could even step away from the lectern, another board member, a man who always nodded in agreement with Carol, spoke up. Madam President, I move that we formally find the property at 1420 Forest Ridge Lane to be in violation and instruct Pinnacle Management to begin levying the fines as outlined in the notice, effective immediately. Second, another voice chirped. All in favor, Carol asked. A chorus of ayes sealed it. No discussion, no examination of his question, just a swift, procedural execution. David stood there, frozen for a moment, the violation notice feeling flimsy and useless in his hand. He had come seeking clarity and dialogue. Armed with reason, he was met with a wall of polite, smiling, unyielding power. The board, under Carol's command, had just voted to start fining him for violating a rule based on an easement they refused to prove existed. He walked back to his seat, the low hum of the fluorescent lights now sounding like a verdict. The first invoice from Pinnacle Management arrived a week later. It was a stark, computer-generated document detailing 7 days of non-compliance at $50 per day. Total due 350 years. The sterile black ink on the white page felt more aggressive than a shouted threat. This was real. His money, his financial security, was now on the line. David's first call was to Pinnacle Management to formally request the documents Carol had mentioned. The woman who answered the phone was a master of cheerful obstruction. Certainly. Mr. Jensen, she chirped. You'll need to fill out a document request form. An R11. You can find that on the homeowner portal. Please be sure to specify the exact documents you're looking for. Date, meeting type, subject matter. The more specific, the better. He spent an hour navigating the clunky online portal, found the form, and filled it out with architectural precision. He requested 1. All board and ACC meeting minutes from the past 10 years, where CC&R for 8.4.2, or view corridor easements, were discussed, amended, or voted upon. 2. The official, recorded plat map of the Sterling Meadows community, referenced in the CC&Rs. He submitted it and received an automated confirmation. 2 days later, an email landed in his inbox from Pinnacle. It was a cost estimate. Dear Mr. Jensen, we have received your document request. The estimated cost to retrieve, review, and redact these documents is as follows. Administrative search fee, $75. Per page copy, fee $50. For an estimated 400 pages, $200. Total estimated cost, $275 ZAGSAR. Please remit payment to our office to begin the process. Please note, this is an estimate and final costs may vary. David stared at the email in disbelief. They wanted him to pay nearly $300 for the public records of his own community, the very records that were being used to justify fining him. The phrase review and redact leaped out at him. Why would official minutes about a property rule need redaction? He paid the fee. He had to. It felt like extortion, but it was the only path forward within their closed system. While he waited, he drove to the county seat. The recorder's office was in the basement of the old courthouse, a quiet, dusty place that smelled of aging paper and history. It was a world away from the sterile hostility of the HOA. He found his way to the records counter and explained his situation to a clerk who looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. Sterling Meadows, she said, her brow furrowing. That one's a bit of a maze. The developer filed multiple plats over the years as they built it out in phases. She gestured to a row of oversized, heavy binders. You can start there. But the originals, the big linen maps, are in the archives. I can pull them for you, but it'll take a bit. Who are you working with? Just myself, for now, David said. Her expression softened. Well, let me introduce you to Maria. She's the senior clerk. Been here 30 years. If a document exists in this county, Maria Sanchez knows where it sleeps. Maria was a formidable woman with a kind smile and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She listened patiently as David laid out his problem, referencing CC&R Fire 8.4.2 and the mysterious view corridor easement. Interesting, Maria said, tapping a pen on her desk. An easement is a real thing, a legal encumbrance on a property. It can't just be declared in the CC&Rs. It has to be legally created and recorded with the county, usually right on the plat map or in a separate deed. It's a cloud on the title. You'd know if you had one. She led him to a large, brightly lit table and returned a few minutes later with a massive, rolled-up document tied with a faded ribbon. This is the master plat for Sterling Meadows. Phase 4, where your lot is. Let's have a look. They carefully unrolled the heavy linen sheet. It was a beautiful, hand-drafted map, filled with the precise, elegant lines of surveyors and engineers. David's father would have loved it. Maria ran a practiced finger along the property lines until she found his parcel, Lot 45. They scanned every inch of it, every notation, every line. There were utility easements marked with dotted lines, and a drainage easement along the back. But there was no mention, no marking, no hint of a view corridor easement anywhere on or near his property. Nothing here, Maria said, confirming his own conclusion. Let's check the deed records for your parcel, just to be sure it wasn't added separately. She spent another 20 minutes at her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Finally, she swiveled in her chair. Clean. Your title is completely clean, going all the way back to the original sale from the developer, according to the official, legally recorded documents of this county. Mr. Jensen, there is no such thing as a view corridor easement on your property. A wave of vindication washed over David, so potent it almost made him dizzy. So, the HOA is enforcing a rule that doesn't apply. It appears they are enforcing a covenant that references a non-existent encumbrance on your lot. Maria corrected with legal precision. The rule itself might be in the CC&Rs, but the geographic condition it requires to be enforced, the recorded easement, doesn't exist. It's like having a rule against parking a boat in a designated no-boat zone, but never actually creating the zone. As David was leaving, his phone buzzed. It was an email from Pinnacle. His documents were ready. He drove to their office, a soulless suite in a suburban office park. The receptionist handed him a thick stack of papers, hole-punched and bound with a single clip. Back in his car, he started to flip through them. It was years of ACC and board meeting minutes. Most mentions of FERA 8.4.2 were boilerplate approvals for fences. But then he found the minutes from a board meeting 2 years ago where the rule was first adopted. He read the section detailing the discussion, but it was almost completely blacked out. Huge, dark boxes of redaction covered entire paragraphs, leaving only a few stray words. The vote to approve the rule was visible, but the entire debate, the entire justification for its creation, was hidden. It was a huge red flag. That evening, another letter arrived. This one was posted on the community bulletin board near the mailboxes, a public declaration of his status as a violator. Public notice of hearing. The Sterling Meadows HOA Board of Directors will hold a hearing on November 15, 2023, to consider the imposition of a lien on the property at 1420 Forest Ridge Lane parcel, ID 77 2B045, for failure to pay outstanding fines and cure a continuing violation of CC&R FERA 8.4.2. The fines had now ballooned to over $1,000. They weren't just trying to make him move his firewood anymore. They were coming for his home. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying, simple clarity. It happened over the course of 2 phone calls on a single, rain-slicked afternoon. The first call was from Maria Sanchez at the county recorder's office. Her voice was tinged with the quiet excitement of a researcher who had solved a difficult puzzle. "Mr. Jensen, it's Maria. I kept digging after you left, because something about that view corridor phrase was nagging at me. It sounded like marketing language, not legal language." She paused for effect. "I found it. Not on your plat map, but on an early-stage conceptual drawing the developer submitted to the Planning Commission a decade ago. It was a sales brochure map. Essentially, it shows a hypothetical view corridor from the lots on the upper ridge, cutting right across your property. But, and this is the important part, it was never surveyed, never recorded, and never made it onto the final official plat map that legally established the property lines and easements for your phase of the development." David gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "So it's a fiction. They're enforcing a rule based on a drawing from a sales brochure." "Precisely," Maria said. "A ghost on a map that doesn't legally exist. They can write whatever they want in their CC&Rs, but they can't create a property interest on your land out of thin air. Only a recorded instrument filed with this office can do that." He thanked her profusely, his mind reeling. He had the proof. The silver bullet. The official county plat map and deed record were his shield and his sword. An hour later, as he was scanning the documents Maria had emailed him, his phone rang again. It was George Miller. His neighbor's usually wry tone was gone, replaced by a low, urgent seriousness. "David, I think I know what this is really about," George said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have a friend who's a real estate appraiser. On a hunch, I asked him to do some digging on Carol Peterson's property. Her house has been on a private, Exclusive listing service for the last 2 months. It hasn't hit the public MLS yet. She's asking top dollar. Okay, David said, not yet seeing the connection. Here's the thing, George continued. The listing notes mention a potential buyer, a high-end property developer, a company called Elysian Homes. And my friend found the offer document. It's a contingent offer. Elysian Homes will only pay her full asking price if, and I quote, the unobstructed, pristine view of the national forest from the rear deck is preserved. The offer expires at the end of the month. The world seemed to slow down. David looked out his window, past his woodpile, through the ponderosa pines, and pictured the line of sight from the opulent houses on the upper ridge. Carol Peterson's house, his cabin, and the tall, beautiful trees on his property stood directly in the way of her pristine view. His woodpile was just the pretext, the first volley in a campaign to gain control over his land. She's trying to force me out, or at least control my property. To close her deal, David said, the words tasting like ash. The view corridor. It's for her view. It's worse than that. David, George said grimly. Her husband was laid off from his finance job 6 months ago. They're over-leveraged on that house. They're desperate. This sale isn't just a windfall for her. It's a lifeline. Suddenly, it all made sense. The cold hostility at the ACC meeting. The immediate, aggressive escalation. The fabricated easement based on a phantom map. The redacted minutes that likely hid a discussion of her personal financial interest in creating the rule. Carol wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a desperate woman using the full power of the HOA as her personal sledgehammer to solve a multi-million-dollar problem. And he and his small cabin were standing in her way. Carol, realizing her procedural timeline was being challenged by David's methodical investigation, abandoned subtlety. The quiet war of certified letters and bureaucratic obstruction escalated into a public smear campaign. It began with the flyers. They appeared overnight, tucked into every door handle in Sterling Meadows, printed on the same cream-colored cardstock as the original courtesy notice. The flyer featured a grainy, unflattering photo of David's cabin, with the woodpile circled in a stark red. The headline read, "Is your property value at risk? One non-compliant resident threatens our community's harmony and safety." The text below was a masterwork of insinuation and fear-mongering. It spoke of uncooperative homeowners who disregarded the shared values of the community. It hinted at fire risks from improperly stored materials and vaguely warned that such violations could impact everyone's insurance rates and property values. It never mentioned David by name, but everyone knew who it was about. It was designed to isolate him, to paint him as a selfish troublemaker, endangering his neighbor's financial well-being. The next front opened online, on the private Sterling Meadows community Facebook group. A post appeared from a new, anonymous profile. It detailed the ongoing struggle the board was having with a resident on Forest Ridge Lane, framing David's requests for documentation as delay tactics and his defense as aggressive obstruction. Comments flowed in from homeowners who, having been fed only one side of the story, decried his behavior. Some people just think the rules don't apply to them. My cousin's HOA had a problem like this. It drove down everyone's prices. Thank you to the board for protecting our investment. David felt a profound sense of isolation. His neighbors, people he waved to on his daily walks, were turning against him based on a campaign of calculated misinformation. He saw one of them, an elderly widow named Mrs. Gable, retrieving one of the flyers from her door. She read it with a worried expression, then glanced up the hill toward his cabin, her face etched with concern. Later that day, He saw a Pinnacle management truck parked in front of her house and an employee affixing a violation notice to her door for a single, cracked picket in her white fence. He could see her through her window, looking at the notice, looking utterly defeated. Carol wasn't just targeting him. She was making an example of anyone who fell short of her perfect vision. Then came the final, official blow. A formal notice, delivered by courier, was taped to his front door. It was the summons for the public hearing to approve the lien against his property. It was scheduled for 72 hours from now. Carol was ramming it through. She was giving him no time to formally prepare a legal response, no time to consult an attorney, no time to rally any support. She was leveraging the community's fear and her control of the process to force a final, decisive vote before his evidence could see the light of day. The hearing was her endgame, the public stage for his official condemnation. The clubhouse was packed, every folding chair was filled, and a line of residents stood along the back wall, a testament to the effectiveness of Carol's fear campaign. The air was thick with a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and quiet hostility. David saw Mrs. Gable sitting in the front row, clutching her purse, looking small and terrified. He gave her a small, reassuring nod, but she quickly looked away. David sat in the second row with George, a single, slim folder resting on his lap. He felt a dull, rhythmic pressure behind his sternum, a slow drumbeat of anxiety. He wasn't a public speaker, but he had spent the last 48 hours rehearsing his presentation, timing it down to the second. Carol called the meeting to order, her voice resonating with confidence. After dispensing with the usual pleasantries, she arrived at the main event. "The next item on the agenda," she announced, "is a hearing regarding the property at 1420 Forest Ridge Lane. The board is recommending the placement of a lien for ongoing violations and unpaid fines totaling $1,750. She gave a polished, concise summary of the case from the board's perspective, painting David as a defiant resident who had refused all reasonable attempts at resolution. When she finished, she looked out at the audience. "As per our bylaws, the homeowner has the right to speak. Mr. Jensen, you have 5 minutes." A small digital timer was placed on the lectern, its red numbers glowing 0500. David walked to the front of the room. He placed his folder on the lectern, aligning its corners perfectly. His hands did not shake. He had a small projector he'd brought from home, and, with a quiet click, he turned it on. An image filled the screen on the wall behind the board. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and clear. "My name is David Jensen. I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity to present the facts of my case." He clicked a button. The first image appeared, a high-resolution scan of the formal violation notice he had received. This is the notice citing a violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2, which prohibits placing materials in a view corridor easement. The entire case against me rests on the existence of this easement on my property. The clock read 04:30. Another click. The screen now showed the official, county-recorded plat map for his section of Sterling Meadows. His own lot was highlighted in yellow. "This," he said, his voice gaining strength, "is the official plat map from the county recorder's office. This is the legal document that defines all property lines and easements in our community. As you can see, there are utility easements, but there is no view corridor easement located anywhere on my property. It does not exist." A murmur went through the crowd. The clock read 03:45. Another click. He projected the conceptual sales map Maria had found. "I believe this may be the source of the confusion. This is an unrecorded, decade-old marketing drawing from the developer. It shows a hypothetical view corridor. This drawing has no legal authority. It is not a recorded document. The board is enforcing a rule based on a ghost from a salesman's brochure. The murmuring grew louder. Carol's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of rigid fury. The clock read, "Yo 250. When I asked the board to provide proof of this easement, David continued, his tone remaining factual. I was directed to file a document request, which I did, at my own expense. Another click. The screen showed a scan of the board meeting minutes he had received, with the large black boxes of redaction covering the text. This is what I received. The entire discussion about the creation of this rule has been blacked out. I have to ask the board what was in that discussion that you felt needed to be hidden from a member of this community. The clock read 0140. He took a breath. This was the final, critical turn. I believe I know why. It has recently come to my attention that Board President Carol Peterson's home is currently under a contingent sales contract with a developer. That contract is dependent on preserving an unobstructed, pristine view, a view that my property happens to be in the middle of. He projected a screenshot of the public-facing real estate listing. This is not about a community rule. This is about a personal financial conflict of interest. Gasps rippled through the room. Carol was ashen-faced. The timer showed 00:55. Now, for the moral twist. He turned off the projector and looked directly at the homeowners. This board's overreach doesn't just affect me, he said, his voice now filled with a quiet passion. I know of other residents, like Mrs. Gable here, who are being fined for trivial things like a single broken fence picket. They are being intimidated into silence. He looked at the elderly woman, whose eyes were now wide with a mixture of terror and hope. So, I'll make you a deal, he said. Turning back to the stunned board, I will personally go to Mrs. Gable's house this weekend and repair her fence, at my own expense. All I ask is that the board voids her fines and ceases this campaign of harassment against residents. I am not a troublemaker. I am a neighbor. I believe in this community, but I believe it should be governed by fairness and transparency, not by personal agendas and phantom rules. He looked at the timer. 0:03. My time is up. A profound, stunned silence filled the room. The red numbers on the timer blinked to 0, the sound of the final beep echoing like a gavel. For a moment, no one moved. Carol Peterson sat frozen, her face a pale, brittle mask. The other board members stared at their notes, at the screen, anywhere but at David or the audience. Then, a voice cut through the stillness. It was a man from the back row. I'd like to see that plat map again, he said, his voice firm. I've been getting notices about my satellite dish being in a restricted airspace zone. I want to see if that's on the map either. It was like a dam breaking. Another homeowner stood up. And what about those redacted minutes? What else is the board hiding? I want to see an unredacted copy. The room erupted. Questions flew from every corner, not just about David's case, but about other fines, other vaguely worded rules, and the exorbitant fees charged by Pinnacle Management. The focus of the room had shifted entirely from the condemnation of one man to an interrogation of the board's power. George Miller rose slowly to his feet, his presence as a retired attorney commanding immediate attention. Madam President, he said, his voice calm but carrying the full weight of the law. In light of the evidence presented by Mr. Jensen, which suggests a significant conflict of interest and the enforcement of a non-existent property encumbrance, I believe this entire proceeding is tainted. He let that sink in before continuing. Therefore, I would like to make a motion from the floor to table the vote on the lien indefinitely. Furthermore, I move that we, the homeowners, Call for an immediate, independent, third-party audit of all board decisions and financial records for the past 2 years, and a formal review of the association's contract with Pinnacle Management. Second, shouted 3 people at once. The room buzzed with energy. Homeowners were talking to each other, comparing notes on their own fines and frustrations, empowered by David's evidence-based stand. They were no longer a silent, intimidated audience. They were a constituency demanding accountability. Carol, visibly shaken, tried to regain control. This is out of order. These motions are not on the agenda. But it was too late. The Pinnacle representative, seeing the tide turn so violently, leaned over and whispered something in her ear, likely advising her that homeowner-initiated motions under state law could not be ignored. Her face crumpled. For the first time, David saw not a tyrant, but a panicked, desperate woman whose scheme had just spectacularly imploded in public. The board secretary, a nervous young man, was forced to call a vote on George's motions. They passed with an overwhelming roar of ayes. Carol Peterson was effectively censured, her authority shattered in the space of 5 minutes. She said nothing, simply staring ahead as her carefully constructed world fell apart. In the weeks that followed, the changes in Sterling Meadows were swift and decisive. The board, facing a homeowner revolt and the threat of legal action, officially voted to drop all fines and rescind the lien notice against David. His record was wiped clean. Carol Peterson resigned from the board, citing personal reasons, and her house was quietly taken off the market. The independent audit began, and Pinnacle Management's contract was placed under formal review, with a new, more transparent management company already being courted. The Saturday after the hearing, David walked over to Mrs. Gable's house with his toolbox. The elderly widow met him at the door, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "No one has ever stood up for me like that. Mr. Jensen," she whispered. "Please, call me David," he said with a warm smile. "And we have to stand up for each other. That's what a community is supposed to be about." He spent the morning carefully replacing the cracked picket in her fence, ensuring the new wood was perfectly aligned and securely fastened. It was a small act of repair, but it felt monumental. It was the physical manifestation of his victory, not just defending his own rights, but restoring a piece of his neighborhood's integrity. As he was packing up his tools, a sleek black car he didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A man in a tailored suit stepped out. He was older, with a calm, appraising gaze. "Mr. Jensen," he asked, extending a hand. "My name is Arthur Sterling. My company is Elysian Homes." David's stomach tightened for a moment, but he shook the man's hand. Sterling's grip was firm, and his expression was not hostile, but respectful. "I was the potential buyer for the Peterson property," Sterling explained. "I was also in the back of the room at that hearing. I must say, I was extraordinarily impressed. Your presentation was a masterclass in diligence and integrity." He gestured toward David's cabin and the forest beyond. "My interest in this area has always been about that view, about the beauty of that natural tree line. After seeing what happened, I realize there's a better way to preserve it than relying on the whims of an HOA president." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the forest edge. "I'm withdrawing my offer on the Peterson house. Instead, I'd like to make a different proposal to you and to the community. I want to fund the creation of a community land trust to purchase and permanently protect the undeveloped county land bordering this development, to ensure that Forest Edge remains pristine forever, for everyone, not just for the person with the best view." David was speechless. "The trust will need a director," Sterling continued. "Someone who knows the land, understands property lines, and has proven they will fight for what's right. I think you'd be perfect to lead the effort." A slow smile spread across David's face. The developer, the boogeyman in Carol's desperate scheme, was not an enemy after all. He was an ally. David looked from the forest to his small cabin, the home his father had built, a place he had fought so hard to protect. His personal battle had not just ended. It had blossomed into an opportunity to create a lasting legacy of preservation for the entire community. "Mr. Sterling," David said, his voice full of a hope he hadn't felt in months, "I accept.